Hi, I'm Terry O'Reilly, founder of OBP Australia, a service for overseas-born professionals looking to either get their first job in Australia or advance their career once they're established in their profession. Welcome to the podcast. Each episode, I'll be talking to an ex-OBP Australia client who's been successful in finding employment in Australia. We'll get to hear about their journey and what advice they have for job seekers. Rochelle is a senior consultant, business analyst and product owner with more than 10 years ICT industry experience in both Australia and Sri Lanka, working within the software development lifecycle and agile environments. Rochelle has experience preparing project documentation, implementing projects which require integration with third-party software, process re-engineering, change management, business process analysis, and gap analysis, to name a few. I first met Rochelle in January 2016 in Colombo, Sri Lanka, where I was running an OBP Australia information session at the Kingsbury Hotel for professionals intending to emigrate to Australia. She was eager to do the preparation required to make a successful transition to a new life in Australia. Rochelle is highly focused and clearly very good at her job, given the role she's had. Rochelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Terry.
Now,
lovely to see you after a while.
It's been a while. It has been a while. Now, we first met in January 2016 in Colombo, Sri Lanka, when I was running an information session at the Kingsbury Hotel for professionals about to embark on the emigration journey to Australia. That's correct?
Yes, it is.
So take us back to that time. What did you know about Australia before you came?
To be honest, I've come to Australia a few times before because I've got family here. So I've been here a fair few times before. But the reason that I attended your information session was, although I had family and friends here, none of them were actually working in the IT industry. So it was difficult for me to get information from them, like what to expect, what is the work culture like, that sort of question. So that's why I decided to join the information session and get as much information as I can, so I know going in what to expect and sort of like what should I do, what shouldn't I do, that sort of thing.
And did you choose Australia because you'd been here before and you had connections?
Yes. Funnily enough, because I've been here before, I kind of like the country, and the fact that it wasn't too hectic, like not too crazy, and the fact that, of course, that I've got family as well. So those are the main reasons that I decided on Australia.
And the same reason you chose Melbourne to settle in?
Actually, the visa that I got, they gave me Adelaide. So when we came here first, we actually went to Adelaide. But back in 2016, I guess the IT sector wasn't very active in Adelaide. So although I managed to get a lot of interviews, I didn't quite land a job as such because of the fact that I had not worked in Australia. So their main concern was the fact that I didn't have Australian, what did they call it? Australian
local experience?
Yeah.
And was that only in Adelaide, or did you find that elsewhere as well?
No, just in Adelaide.
It's always a little bit harder in the smaller cities.
Correct. But since then, I've got few friends who have gone into Adelaide, so it's really changed, and there are a lot of IT companies that have opened branches and stuff in Adelaide. So it's changed. But back in 2016, that's where I first went. And because it didn't work out, then I moved to Melbourne.
Right. And now take us back to when you first arrived. You had been here before. How many times had you been to Australia before you finally settled?
Probably 6, 7 times.
Oh, wow. That's quite a lot, yeah. It's almost like a second home before you arrived, isn't it?
Yeah.
So take us back to the final one when you came to live, to settle. Tell us about those first few weeks and months in Adelaide where things were a bit tough finding work.
Yes. So when we first came here, we were in Melbourne for about probably 2-3 weeks, and that's where we sort of went through the rental properties in Adelaide, and my cousins got in touch with some of their friends to kind of give us like the ideal location or the best locations in Adelaide where there was trams and stuff, because none of us had really any idea about Adelaide. And then once we found a reasonable property or properties really, that's when we went in. And the first few weeks was pretty much trying to find a place to stay. So we stayed in a motel, and then we went apartment hunting, and then we finally found one, and then obviously moved in. And it was a bit of a culture shock, because coming from Sri Lanka, you're used to having the shops open till like 10, 11 in the night, sometimes later. But when we actually came to Adelaide at that point, even Coles and Woolies would close up by about 4 o'clock, even on weekdays. So that was a bit of a culture shock.
Yeah, that's a very different feel. And more people around, I think, too, in Colombo and most cities in the world. I think a lot of people say when they get here, where are all the people?
Correct. And Adelaide was a lot less people and a lot less younger people at that time. So like our neighbors were really lovely, two very old couples, but they were really lovely. So I think we were like the only young people in that apartment unit. But most of them were like retirees or, I think most of them were retirees. So it was difficult at first to, kind of connect, because they are from a different age group, and then you're from a different age group. Also, you're from a different country. So, but they were lovely, and they made us feel very welcome. And then we
So
used
how
to.
long did you persist in Adelaide before you felt you had to relocate to Melbourne?
We were there for about 6 months, so a
That's
good
quite a
six
while, yeah.
months. Yeah. And myself and my husband both, we were applying for jobs. And when the IT sector wasn't working out, we started applying for, say, casual jobs. And that too, the fact that we have never worked in Australia before was a factor that we got rejected. So, and then, but we did think about, okay, we got here this far, like we can't go back. Um, or rather, the last resort was to go back if nothing worked out. But we were both persistent, and we were like, okay, how can we get out of this? So we reached out to friends, and we reached out to people that we used to work with, so old colleagues, old school friends, and friends of friends. We just started making connections. And then finally, something came through where a previous colleague of mine said they have a company in Melbourne, and there is an opening where I'm willing to relocate. So I said yes, and that's how we moved into Melbourne.
It's amazing, isn't it? You're the same person, but if you have a contact in the company, all of a sudden you're a different person.
Exactly.
So,
and I think it also is the fact that Melbourne is more migrant friendly, whereas Adelaide wasn't at that point. But things have changed now.
so you didn't need to use recruiters to get your first job. You got it through a contact. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Was there an interview for that job? I'm assuming there was.
Yeah, so there were about 2 remote interviews, because they did the initial one over the phone and then one over Zoom while I was still in Adelaide. And then they had two more when I came to Melbourne. So I think the whole interview process was about 4 sessions, I think.
And what was that first job that you had? What job title?
It was a digital producer. So kind of like a BA, but more into the websites, really, just website creation. How they used Magento, the company, so it was more requirement gathering, and then passing the development center was offshore. So it's passing on the requirements to them and then getting a feel about how the pages are designed and how it's set up and what are the colors the client wants, and communicating all that information back to the development center and making sure that the quality was of good standard.
So much of a technical aspect from your end, or was it more requirement gathering and coordinating things?
It was more requirement gathering and coordinating, because if it was, say, something to do with the database structure, one of the offshore people got involved in those requirement gathering sessions. So we used to pretty much do Zoom calls as well, even back then, because of the fact that the development center was offshore.
Right. So the reason I ask about how much technical aspect there was to the role was at the interview, was it all soft skills assessment, or was there some test that you were given as well, a technical
There
test?
was a test. There was a technical test.
What
So
was that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so they gave different scenarios, and then it was pretty much checking how, as a BA, what sort of information I would gather, and how, as a BA, I would handle a certain situation where, say, the client was difficult or they didn't know what they wanted. So how would I actually get into their head and get that information out of them when they didn't know how to express it, sort of. So yeah, that's the kind of questions they threw at me.
And how did that interview compare to what you would go through in Sri Lanka? Was it similar, or was it significantly different?
It was different, because in Sri Lanka sometimes the interviews don't take that long. Like, I think probably 2-3 sessions and that's it. But whereas in Australia, at least a minimum of 4 interviews are there. And sometimes it's the first one is a phone interview, or sometimes even with the recruiter if you go through a recruiter. And then the second one would be someone from the company. So it was more a chat to see how we would fit culturally and with the values of the company. And then the next one would be a more technical one where they'd throw a scenario at you and they'd ask what sort of, as a BA, what sort of questions would you ask the potential clients? And then this is a scenario, how would you react? That sort of thing. And before my recent role, they actually gave me a scenario of one of the clients that they're actually working with. And I had to come up with the use cases and figure out using the BA techniques of prioritization, what are the use cases I would work, or the use cases I would work on first, and how would I write the user stories, to what level I would write the user stories, and then how would I explain it to the developer. So there was a role play as well. So it really depends on the company and the kind of questions they ask.
Yeah, the process can be incredibly long with all of the interviews, can't it? It's unbelievable. Second round, third round. It seems like it takes forever just to get the job. So that brings us to what you're currently doing and your job. Just before we go on there, I do have a dog in my room snoring at the moment. So if people can hear that in the background, it's not me. I have a very old Cavalier who's on the chair behind me making a bit of noise. So just bear with that. So your current job, you're a senior consultant business analyst at the moment. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Take us through what you do on a daily basis, and maybe explain it for somebody who's from your industry, a professional peer, because there'll be people listening who do your job.
Yep. So this is predominantly a consulting role. So on a daily basis, it depending on the type of project that you're doing, I am actually required to facilitate some of the agile ceremonies, like say stand-ups, retros, sprint planning or grooming, backlog grooming, that sort of thing. And so during the stand-up, we pretty much go around the table as such, and I'll get the updates from everyone as to what they're doing, what they did, what they plan to do, and if they have any roadblocks and things like that. And then next we'll be working on, I'll be working on the user stories if I need to refine them, if I need to speak with the business owners or the product owners and add more to it. And then would have technical sessions with the developers as to say, this is what we need. The difference between this company is it's a team effort where it comes to design. So it's not just me saying this is, or me or the tech lead saying, this is what we need, this is how you should do it. It's more of a team effort. So everybody gets a chance to voice their opinions, and that can be good or bad. And so, yeah. And
what would you say are the challenges in your job? What are the tough parts, I guess, for a senior consultant?
Sometimes not really knowing the technology, because you may have never worked in that technology, and sometimes you are thrown into that situation and it takes a while to really understand what the guys are talking about. Or sometimes developers can be really, really techy, and it goes over your head and you're like, can you explain that in English sort of thing, without going into too much of technical detail. So, but if you're persistent, I guess you can get there. You can get help, or you can sometimes use Google to understand some of the things. And if the
So that
developers are
professional
friendly.
development, that new acquisition of new skills, is that left up to you, or is there some formal process of training or professional development?
There's both. So if I want to, I can request for certain training, and the company allows me to go for training, whether it's soft skills or certification as such. So depending on the allocated budget, I can choose one of the types of training and then attend. And there is also books that the company lends out, so we can read and do things on our own in our own time as well. And sometimes some things I just learn on my own because I know I don't know this. So if I know this, it's going to help me. So I do that on my own time as well.
And I suppose things change so quickly in your industry as well. Often there's not somebody to teach it necessarily. It's always new things coming up. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. Yes. The technology specifically, it keeps changing quite rapidly. And also when you're in a consulting role, it's very different to a product role, which was what I had previous experience with. So you know the product inside out. It's just you're focusing on just the product development and the clients. Whereas with a consulting role, you are sort of you might do one project which is in fintech, and then you might move to another project which is say in mining or something like that. So it's completely different industries, and sometimes you may not really have any experience working in that industry. So it's just learning the language that they're using, learning the terminology, as well as trying to understand what the client wants as well. So it can be challenging, but it's also quite rewarding as well.
Do you find it easier to work within an industry domain that you've worked in before, or they're all the same? I mean, not all the same, but they all have their own challenges.
They all have their challenges. So the reason I actually decided to go from product focus to consulting was because after you work in a product company for 2-3 years, you kind of know the product. And although they may be introducing new features, it's still for that product or it's still for that industry. But whereas in consulting, that challenges you more because you are sort of given opportunities to work in sectors that you've never worked in before. And so you can grow your knowledge
It
and
must
you
be
can
great for
learn
your
from others.
it must be great for your professional development, getting that
It
breadth
is.
of experience.
It is, yes.
So there'll be a lot of people listening who don't have the level of experience that you do have. What advice do you have for somebody who's trying to break in as a BA, a business analyst somewhere? Maybe they've just finished university and they're looking to get their first job. What's a good starting point?
I would say if you ever get a chance to play multiple roles in your industry, I'm talking specifically for IT. I don't really know about the other industries, but say if you manage to get in, even as a QA, I would say just go in, get that experience, because if you play multiple roles, trust me, that knowledge that you gain during that time would help you down the track as well. So the reason I'm saying that was I started my career as a QA, and that's when I realized I actually like to know what's inside the customer's head. And so I learned the tools and techniques and how the quality assurance is done. But then I wanted to know, okay, this might be one way the customer might use it. So what are the other ways the customer use it? And to get that sort of information, you need to be someone who's willing to talk to um, the end customer, the end user. So that's when I decided to change track.
So did you move
So
up within the company? Did you go from QA to BA within the company, or did you shift
yes,
company? You did.
no, I just went up within the company. That was back in Sri Lanka.
So it's always easier to move up inside a company than as opposed to trying to go sideways outside and then up because they know you already, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And it also depends on some of the employers because even though you're coming from a QA background, but if you have that um, drive to learn things and if you have that thirst for knowledge, they may, and if you kind of prove yourself during the interview process or even during the probation period, they might actually consider giving you that opportunity. So don't shy away. And if you ever get an opportunity to do multiple roles, take it because all of that experience helps you in whatever role you end up with.
Yes, that's good advice. And thinking about Australian culture in general and Australian workplace culture, at least in the jobs that you've had, how does it differ from the way people operate in Sri Lanka, for example? So management style, perhaps, level of formality. What's different about working in Australia?
In the companies that I've worked here, there is no hierarchical structure. It's flat structure. So, I mean, of course, we do have managers, but it's not strictly enforced, if that makes sense. And also, what I found out here is back in Sri Lanka, let's say, depending on the type of project, sometimes even though you knock off at a certain time, you might be required to join meetings or reply to emails, even if you're at home. But in Australia, if you knock off at whatever time that you knock off, that's it. Until the next day, you're not expected to read emails or to join calls unless it's an emergency or unless there's like a big release going out and you are required to stay and help the team. But otherwise, it's really like you're supposed to work only during the time that you're supposed to work, and the rest of the time you can you can have your me time, or you can spend it with your family, or do anything you want. So, and that's something that I really like here.
So in Sri Lanka, it sort of bleeds into one or the other, does it? The work and the home life.
Yeah, because most of the IT companies in Sri Lanka are servicing European clients, or European or Australian. So you do tend to work the Sri Lankan hours plus the client's hours, at least half of it. So it's like a very long day at the end of it. But here it's just you work the Australian hours and that's it.
And what
And
about?
also, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
And also the office culture is different where, like Fridays, it's more casual, and you you can have like, you can leave early, or you get in some companies they have beer o'clock. So you get either wine or beer or something like that if you're into it, or you can just leave early. So that's also something different.
The beer o'clock. So how do? It's a very familiar term for me, of course, but how do people who don't drink alcohol fit in at that time where people go to the pub at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock on a Friday or have drinks in house? How do they fit in?
Um, well, in the companies that I've worked in, if you actually don't drink, there are other non-alcoholic beverages on offer. Um, Even if you actually do go into a pub, you can actually just grab a soft drink if they have it.
Sure.
But it's just, sort of, it's not really about drinking. It's more about socialization and connecting um, outside of work. Connecting as a person rather than this is Rochelle, she's a BA, this is so and so, that's a product owner, that sort of thing. It's just getting to know me as a person and the other person as a person. So yeah,
And
otherwise you have the option to go home early.
right. And what about other aspects of fitting in? What do your colleagues talk about at work? It's not always about work-related matters. So what do you discuss?
Well, I've been working in very inclusive companies. So we've got people from all over the world. So it's really getting to know them, their culture, their families, and why they came here, and like what has changed in terms of what they used to do back at home during festivals to what they do it here, how they do it here. So yeah, it's just, and trying out different food because there are so many different food options in Melbourne. So, like whether you're Indian, whether you're Greek, whether you're British, whatever, there are so many food options. So, it's really getting to know them, appreciating their culture, appreciating their cuisine, and yeah, it's sort of like a different experience.
That's excellent advice. Just to finish up, you were in a slightly different situation in that you were quite familiar with the country when you arrived. What advice would you give to somebody who is about to leave their country of origin to emigrate to Australia? What can they do in preparation to find work? If you had
Um,
known, let's say, beforehand,
mhm.
what was going to happen when you arrived in Adelaide and Melbourne, what would you suggest to somebody who has not yet departed their country of origin?
Do your research. So whether you've been here or not, um, do your research. So that means research about the place that you potentially want to settle in, whether that's permanent or temporary, and your industry. So that might be going for information sessions such as um, similar to what you had, or it can be just stuff online that you can find. And also some of the companies, especially the IT companies here, they do provide work visas. So if if you want, um, research about those companies, their culture, and just don't apply for the sake of applying, because unless you have that cultural fitting, it's going to be difficult. So just do your research, and if you would find a company that does allow work visas, speak to them first, and whether it's through email or whether it's Zoom, speak to them first, try and understand what it is, and if you can secure a work visa, by all means go for it. But otherwise, if you can't, it's just do your research.
So when you say a work visa, are you talking about employer-sponsored ones or just a general?
Correct.
Yeah.
No,
So do you know many people who've taken that road?
Yeah, I know a couple of people. Again, these are the ones residing in Adelaide. So there are companies that does employer-sponsored visas, and there are a few in Melbourne as well, actually.
Are they for BA roles generally or QA testing roles? What's typical within your industry for sponsorship?
So for some, it's actually developers. It really depends, I guess, on the company and what they're looking at. So some are developers, some are QAs, and some are actually project managers as well. So it depends on what the company is looking for at that time and your skill set. So if it matches and you can sort of show proof that you have worked in whatever the industry that they're working in, or you have the skills to make it work, you are given a fair chance, I feel.
Excellent advice. So thanks for joining us today and sharing your experience, Rochelle, and congratulations on the success you've had in your career and establishing yourself and settling after an initial rocky start, but that's quite typical for many people. So thank you and good luck for the future, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Terry, for the opportunity.
OBP Australia provides guidance and support with job applications and approaching employers, industry awareness, interview coaching, and language and communication. You'll also be introduced to your professional peers already working in Australia, so you can get the lowdown on what's happening in your industry or profession. If you're looking for guidance and support to find your next job, email me at terry@obpaustralia.com.au. Let's talk.